Superb, thank you very much. Okay, so as Jane says, before handing over to Chris and Alan to cover two of the examples of V-KEMS work, I've been asked to briefly cover what V-KEMS is, where it's come from, and what it's been doing for the last 12 months or so. So in brief, V-KEMS was set up as an informal network of organisations and interested academics as a direct response to the lockdown in March 2020 to try and counter some of the disruption to the mathematical science knowledge exchange that the lockdown created. And from the start, it had three pillars of activity. The short term, to provide some leadership and support to the mathematical sciences to undertake knowledge exchange activities. If you remember back in March, April last year, then there's a vast swathe of activities being cancelled, and we, the infrastructure and the people you see on the slide, didn't want to see that happen. So we wanted to provide a resource and an infrastructure for the community to use. In the medium term, we wanted to provide some modelling support for governments and charities who had been affected directly or indirectly by the pandemic. And then in the longer term, and what we're more pivoting towards now, position the mathematical sciences to drive the post-COVID economic recovery. So supporting key enabling technologies and sectors such as future transport paradigms and sustainable economic principles. So the institutions involved in founding this initiative. So we have support from the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge and their knowledge exchange arm, the Newton Gateway, which Jane mentioned, the International Centre for Mathematical Sciences in Edinburgh, and KTN, who I represent. By way of very brief introduction, KTN, we're funded in large part by UK Government Department of Business Innovation, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to connect capability to need, and the mathematical sciences just being one part of this. So I'll say here that V-KEMS wasn't supported by any new funding initiative or received any extra funding from government or anyone else, but rather a redirection of activities of the four institutions' core activity, and vitally made possible by the generous goodwill of many researchers across the UK. Core to this have been a lot of time given by Professors Rebecca Hoyle, Chris Budd and Alan Champney, who we'll hear from shortly, and Joe Jordan as well, been very important to getting this going, and we're very grateful. So yes, this was formed March 2020 and has been active progressively more so as the year developed. So briefly show on this slide the various modelling responses to the pandemic in the UK. And to map out the various initiatives, I'll point to the middle row of public organisation logos you see there, and highlight a number of initiatives that have either started up or were active at the time. So the IDP, the Infectious Dynamics of Pandemics programme, was a virtual programme set up by the Isaac Newton Institute pretty much as soon as the pandemic hit in March. The Rapid Assistance in Modelling the Pandemic programme, RAMP, was set up by the Royal Society around the same time, and its continuation programme is being managed at the moment by the Newton Gateway. The Juniper Consortium is something that kicked off, I think, late last year, a UKRI funded programme for epidemiological modelling. And then above that, you have the policy-facing groups, that SPI-M and SAGE, which interact and produce modelling advice for central government. Now, V-KEMS hasn't sought to compete with any of these, but rather complement them, and we have strong working relationships with all of these programmes. But I think importantly, we have capacity to think about the questions which will be needing longer term answers, and perhaps ones that are not necessarily epidemiological in nature, so as to support these other end users, industry, third sector and other government departments, and questions they might have. So we set ourselves a mission statement, and right from the outset, this was to continue constructive knowledge exchange during the lockdown for economic and social benefit, and to set up valuable infrastructure for the future. So this speaks a little to what Professor Abrahams was talking last month about on the connected centres. I think we believe V-KEMS could be a model which we could build on to realise this connected centres, albeit in a virtual and distributed fashion. So V-KEMS is being delivered through the coordination of study groups, research workshops, discussion forums, and also followed up by leveraging resource through studentships and research grants. So I won't go through this in detail for time, but just to highlight the various end users we've been working with: government departments such as Innovate UK, NHS, academic networks such as the Fluids Network, charities such as FareShare, and the private sector, for example, assessing risk for rail travel, which Chris is going to move on shortly. So I'll quickly skip on to the next one, just for completeness, to show the various study groups that we've facilitated since last April. So I won't go through them in detail. These are all available on the website at the bottom right-hand corner. But the ones highlighted are the ones which have happened 2021, which Alan and Chris will cover shortly. But if you want any more details on any of those, they are all available on the website, and the various reports that come from them are there. And so I think we've learned quite a lot about how to run these virtually. And there are things that we'd want to survive as we transition back to physical meetings. For example, I think we've learned and been a key part in helping researchers and particularly students feel connected during the lockdown and feeling like they're working on important challenges in what can be quite an isolating time for any young researcher's life. I think V-KEMS has been an important part for people to feel like they're doing their part and feel connected. Then the diversity and inclusion aspects, certainly more senior researchers and heads of department have contacted us saying that these virtual sessions have allowed them to balance administrative tasks, research, teaching, childcare responsibilities, but still be able to input into these important challenges. So finally, I just wanted to finish my introduction to this by saying that V-KEMS has been a pretty successful example of how to set knowledge exchange infrastructure up in an emergency. It's been very successful in bringing together pure mathematicians, applied mathematicians, social scientists, behavioural scientists, and switched quickly onto problems that are of the utmost social and economic importance. I'm going to leave it on just a few notes about the future and things that I think we can learn from before passing over to our two examples. So post-pandemic, what are the urgent economic and social activities we should pivot the infrastructure towards? Things like resilient local economies, safeguarding against future pandemics in the design of future neighbourhoods. Any ideas are welcome in that space. Maintaining support for knowledge exchange, particularly when time is stretched. How can we incentivise and how can we perhaps compensate people's time to take part in these things? Systematic follow-up. We've been free to experiment with some approaches here, facilitating studentships, spending unspent travel and subsistence budget from the infrastructure to provide small pots of money to follow up the work of study groups. And finally, each of these sessions routinely produce reports which are detailed working papers that have often been the basis of further discussions and activity. Can we make better use as a community of the Cambridge Open Maths and Industry reports, which curate papers which come from these types of activity? I've put the website there, and I feel that's probably a good opportunity for us to use, which is something that wasn't there last year, which is there now. So with that, I'm slightly before time, so I think I will pass them back to Jane. So thank you very much.